welcome to Shayna-Mae OG Trans Gal. Now that's got to be confusing you if you're new to the channel, so I'm strongly going to recommend that you drop a couple days back and at least look at the thumbnail so you can know what I'm about and what you're seeing here, what is happening here. And this has been a wild ride these last 10 days. Today's day 10 without the old estradiol patch. And we're a couple months into no testosterone blocker in my system, so testosterone levels coming back up. And the changes to my body are permanent. They will alter a little bit. And I'm coming to terms with this, but I'm also sort of doing something very publicly to answer some questions for myself. And it's in my backlog of stories, but just briefly, I'm a 53-year-old transsexual person. I'm not a woman. I've come to terms with that. I'm not a female. I've come to terms with that. I'm a male-born individual that from a very young age felt the desire and need and some sort of a connection to femininity, to girlhood, to young ladyhood, to young woman, and even in my 50s, that there's a part of me that this deeply satisfies something inside of me. But I think because I'm somewhat intellectually gifted and a hyper creative, and I'm also driven for answers. I like to understand things thoroughly. And I was no longer satisfied with the notion of, well, if you really feel like you're a woman and you can take the medications to become a woman, well, then you're a woman. And what started really drawing my attention and concern was when I saw that this whole movement was becoming a social movement that really seemed to be driven by political correctness gone wild. And they were beginning to normalize it. And I get what happened in the beginning. If an adult under the proper care of a psychologist and the medical profession wishes to change their gender, that they shouldn't be excluded from having a career, or they shouldn't be basically discriminated against for being different. But somewhere along the line, somebody tried a little too hard to really design this concept and sell it as fact that men can become women. So I started looking at myself in this and saying, am I honestly a woman or not? And the answer was, well, I've always wanted to be a woman. I've always thought I was a woman. And that was the answer. Until that answer led to a question. Based on what? And what brought that question up is when I began to see younger and younger kids and their parents declaring that they were also girls. Like my little son was born transgender. He thinks he's a girl. He's a girl trapped inside of a little boy's body. I know this because he doesn't like his penis, or because he likes girl things and kicks and screams when he can't wear a princess outfit. So we let him play for the whole summer in a girl's bathing suit in the backyard. He's happy. And so I was looking, well, how would a 5-year-old know that he wants to grow up to be a woman? Maybe he just wants to look like his sisters or look like the other girls in his life. So that got me to thinking, well, when did I start wanting to be a girl? 4 or 5 years old. Interesting. Why? What was the health of my mother? What was the environment which I was being raised in? And I looked around, there was nobody willing, or that I know of, that's ever come up and just talked it out. Seeking the answer, not proclaiming to have the answer. And I'm not seeking the answer for you or you or you or the trans community at large. I was seeking the answer for myself. And along the way, I said, I'm going to write my memoirs about my life. And briefly, I was born in 1970 to a woman who was actively using heroin, cocaine, LSD, alcoholic, who would eventually die from that disease. But the whole time she was carrying me to term, she was pumping those drugs into her body. So there's no telling what didn't quite develop right up here. What little bit of wiring could be out of whack. But let's take that out of the equation. Let's just assume that the mother for that brief period of time was healthy enough that she created a healthy baby within her and brought that baby to this world with everything, all the, all indicators, all systems go, no cognitive issues due to mutation or anything like that, or miswiring. What was my environment like? And so I started looking at that. And by the time I was 3 years old, I was already being brutally beaten for a child. Shaken, smacked, slapped, left in a crib, soiled diapers, starving, not being fed on time. Because the mother was an active alcoholic, hippy-dippy, maniac. I don't have memories from being 3, but I do have memories from around 4 or 5. When I suddenly one day saw a dress that my sisters had been wearing, and I put it on. And from that moment on, I thought, I want to be a girl. I wish I were a girl like my sisters. They get to wear ribbons and they get to twirl, but what would go on in a young boy's life that they would be compelled to do that? Is it that there was a girl trapped inside of me? But as I sat back and started working with a therapist and unpacked my past, by 4 and 5 years old, men to me were monsters. I didn't have a father in the picture, but my mom was one of these loose women that would have sex with multiple partners at one time in front of us. They were into the whole orgy scene, drug scene, LSD scene. And I was already being deeply scarred by the men in her life. Whereas she would protect the girls, she would oftentimes leave me with these men who were tripping on drugs and drunk. And I saw men as monsters. And I saw me as a victim of the monsters, but girls weren't. And it's taken me 40-something years to realize that could have been a catalyst, that I began wishing and dreaming to be a girl at such a young age. And that abuse pattern would continue all the way through till I was 7 years old. And at 7 years old, I ended up living in a house filled with women and young women. It was a grandmother widowed with her with her daughter who was divorced, who had two daughters of her own. So we have a widowed grandmother, a single woman, the daughter of the grandmother, and her 2 daughters. So we got grandchildren, we've got daughter, we've got the mother. And I'm living in this house filled with women. And I'm also living there with my 2 siblings, an older sister and a younger sister, and I'm the only boy. I was rambunctious. I was already emotionally scarred. I was self-harming. And so I was constantly getting looked at and getting dealt with. And I almost felt like an inconvenience. And in that house, I also was filled with femininity. And I wanted to be like them because the girls weren't getting in trouble. The girls were getting their hair brushed and putting on cute things, and I was wanting to be like them. And at some point, I put on a girl's bathing suit one day, and the older gal in the house, the guardian grandmother at the time, she let me live a whole summer wearing tutus and ballerina outfits. But she was always careful to make sure that I put on a cowboy hat and went and did some boy things and rode the big wheel down the driveway and did all that stuff too. And she would always say, hey, you're a boy. If you want to dress like a girl, it's okay. But I don't think back in 1977 that she was even aware of the torture and the abuse and the mental imprint that I already had developed in my psyche that I wanted to be a girl. And here's an important note to also add to this. I hadn't been to school. I had only been in that environment. When you have a drug addict raising a child and nobody's paying attention, I wasn't going to school. Very, very seldomly would I get enrolled. And it might be for a week or two. And then we were usually evicted from whatever place we were living in, or the boyfriend would kick mom out because she was a maniac. And we'd live in a car and drive around. I'd get dropped off with all sorts of strangers and get picked up by children's services, to the point where I lived in 32 temporary placements all before I was age 7. And in a lot of those temporary placements, not all of them, but a lot of them, more abuse, more neglect. And I never got to know a family, and no family ever got to know me. So I was basically raising myself through perception. And I think that perception took deep root in me. And at 7 years old, I ended up living in an orphanage. And when I got to that orphanage, I was so effeminate, so fragile, so malnourished, so underdeveloped, that they put me over with the girls. But not too long after that, they saw that I kissed a girl on the cheek at 7 or 8 years old, and they marched me into the barber that was on site at this orphanage. He buzzed my hair off. They threw me a bag of hand-me-down clothes that was left at the orphanage, and I got shoved into a boys' dorm where I didn't understand boys. I'd never been socialized with boys. And I was also with a group of boys that were equally abused, equally sick, and they were doing things that would be considered very disapproving. And there was no way that the counselor for each group of boys could be aware of what was happening up in the dorms at nighttime. And back then they called it booty busting, right? Young boys experimenting sexually with other boys because they were all abused boys too. And I sat quietly and hid in the corner of the dorm. And by some act of God, a family got involved with that orphanage looking to help, contribute to a young person's life in some way. And so they got involved with a program called Special Friends, which is where they met me. And it was sort of like a Big Brother program, but it was like a normal family program, where the idea was to take these deeply abused and emotionally scarred kids and pair them with a family so at least this kid could see some sense of normalcy and some sense of family. Although that concept was too much for me to understand at 7, the family, the mother, the father, and their daughter who came in to meet me, they fell in love with me. And they felt compelled to invite me into their family. They took me in as a foster child. And then by the time I was 10 years old, they sat me down one day and they asked me if I'd like to be a member of their family and if I'd like to have a forever mom and dad and sister. And when I got into that family, I was very rambunctious, very troubled, very rebellious. Again, I had no actual education. I struggled. I felt different. I felt stupid. There was a lot of pressure in school. Once I went from living in poverty and squalor to living in a nice neighborhood, going to a private school, I didn't fit in. And the boys were mean to me because that's what boys are. But I couldn't handle it like a normal boy, so what happened to me? I looked with envy at all the girls around me and wanted to be one. And by the time puberty hit, little things started sparking inside of me. I was noticing that my sister was attractive to a lot of my friends. And her clothes and her stuff, were pretty. And I wanted boys to like me the way they liked my sister. Not through attraction, but just the way they looked up to her. Oh, she's so pretty, she's so nice, your sister's so nice, your sister's so cool. And then I watched my parents dealing and interacting with their daughter, and my sister always got it right. She never didn't do her homework. She always came home on time, and she was raised in a very healthy, loving, nurturing environment. And for my perception, it was bad for me to be a boy. I should be a girl still. So they didn't know it, but it was reinforced. Now, this family would see me start to cross-dress and become obsessed with it. But back then, there was no conversation like I'm even having right now. So they figured it was probably puberty and curiosity, and maybe I was just exploring ideas. But it was also dealt with in the sense that you're not going to be doing that in this house. We love you. If you want to wear girls' pajamas or something, every once in a while it's okay, but God brought us a little boy to raise. But even they didn't know how deep my scars were, because by the time I got there and into their family, I would talk to a therapist about some of the stuff I went through, but I was so afraid that the therapist would beat me or that my father would find out about what I'd been through and they would judge me and maybe give me back to the orphanage. I never told them how I felt about myself and what really, really, really happened to me. And again, I was in a whirlwind of discovery, trying to fit in, trying to get along. So I know that's a long recap, But it's the first time you guys have seen me do that from this visual of me. And with this sort of mind clarity, because during the course of the last month, as I've been pondering this and sort of making sense of it and adding my own commentary of what I think of the trans community, and what I'm beginning to realize at 53 years of age, was that I could never become the woman I wanted to be, and these kids that are wanting the transition can never become the women they think they can become, because all they have is a visual representation of what femininity and womanhood or girlhood is. We will never know if we've achieved it. Even with the boobs and even with the body and the skin and the hair and the makeup and the clothes, it doesn't make us women or girls. And luckily I was gifted with intellect, though it took a long time to sink in. I'm realizing that I can never and I will never become what it is I always thought I could become, but I could look at it objectively and make sense of it. And at this point I know this: I will likely forever want to have times where I express my feminine side. I don't think I'll ever regret developing the breast, although at times it will be embarrassing and cause confusion. And I believe there will still be days that I go out and for my own comfort and my own sense of fulfillment will go out and present as a gal. But I don't think it's right for me to continue trying to live my life in achieving womanhood. Who knows, maybe in 5 or 10 years when I'm beyond my industry and beyond my business and I'm able to provide and stabilize my family to the point where I can retire, maybe then I'll just live as an old gal for the rest of my life. When masculinity and strength and sort of leadership, that I have more capacity as a full-blown male is no longer needed, and I can allow a feminized male to live a more feminized life when the stakes aren't so high. But along the way, I'm going to share this whole experience, and I'm going to do one more thing with this. We're going to go about a month or two here, and we're going to keep getting my blood checked, and when my system's all back to as close to my natural male chemistry balance, I'm going to document everything, and then I'm going to go back on the feminizing process again. So all of you can see how it changes my mood, how it changes my demeanor, and I'm going to report to you like how I'm handling life. Now here's a very real truth story. Without an education of more than 6 years, I started getting educated at 10. I dropped out of high school at 16. I got into drugs and alcohol, lived a wild, crazy life, minor scrapes with the law, misdemeanor stuff. I was heading down a rough road. But somehow, through the love and the nurturing and the seeds planted by my adopted family, I was able to have a moral compass and enough sense of self and dignity and self-love and confidence that I became a millionaire. And the one thing I never knew how to do was manage my money, because I was trying to buy my childhood back at some extent. So I'd make a lot of money, spend a lot of money. I knew how to make it and I knew how to spend it, but I never knew how to manage it. But when the estrogen came in, I'd had more money than I'd ever had in my life. I was providing more for my family and my staff than I ever had in my life. And it was stabilizing. But it all went out of whack many years ago when I started taking the estrogen on a consistent, regular basis. I started getting forgetful, sensitive, constantly feeling exhausted, overwhelmed. I still had creative thoughts, but the linear path of knowing how to do and what to do and when to do it seemed to get very fuzzy for me. And it is amazing to me right now that in the last 10 days, I've regained some of that focus and that clarity. I am this close to losing everything. I work in an industry that's on strike right now. I work in an industry where they celebrate the differences in people. They embrace transgenderism in this industry. It's very risky for me to be here talking about this, being that I'm trying to save my company. It is on death's doorstep right now, completely out of money. We have no operating capital, and I've depleted all my financial resources since the pandemic trying to keep the doors open. And I said something to my wife a few months back. I said, what we need in our life right now is a man. And I know the man I'd want in our life. me. So this is the first day the man has come out from behind the makeup. This is day 10. And if you appreciate this video, please subscribe. And if you believe in what I'm doing, please share this video and leave a like. I don't have the financial resources to do this at the level I want, but I'm going to dive into other sort of concepts of transsexualism, because I want to also show you guys what a transsexual has as far as upper body strength, and show that they're like me. Now that you see me out of the makeup and the hair pulled back and proper male glasses on, would you ever in a million years imagine me competing with other 50-year-old women in tennis or soccer or swimming or MMA boxing? Could you imagine that? So I'm able to kind of pull the veil back on all this stuff through the social pressure, through the social movement of normalizing transgenderism, and bring a truthful accounting of events as they're unfolding in my life, and then show you guys what happens when I refeminize the body. Across the board, all perspectives, how it affected me physically, what I'm still capable of, what I've become less capable of, but also what's happening in my mind, with my emotions, with my sleep patterns, eating patterns, thought patterns. And I'm doing all this involved with a therapist. So I'm not going this alone, and I'm working with a doctor as far as making sure my blood work, that I'm safe, because what I'm doing is extremely risky. But I'd rather provide answers for all of you at the risk of myself, and also provide answers for myself that may put me on a better trajectory to live a healthy, happy, meaningful life. And I'm learning now that it's really the aesthetic that I've been drawn to. And I like wearing women's clothes. I love looking like one of the gals. And it is nice, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary to alter my body and my mind to the extent where I cannot live as productive and precise of a life that I was meant to live as designed by our Creator. I tell everybody a lot of what I went through was because I indoctrinated myself on the internet. And the algorithm helped. It piled it in, and validated. Folks, if you've got kids on social media, they're going to be mad at you because they want, you guys are trying to be their friends and trying to let them have access to the internet like all the other kids have. But if your kids are showing signs of genderqueer or gender dysphoria, take their devices away. Don't give them literature on transgenderism or anything of sexuality nature before they're the age of puberty. Get them outside. Go on walks with them. Play ball. Go on hikes. Go on camping trips. Get them off the internet. Take them to church. Teach them of God. Teach them of the universe if you don't believe in God. But teach them who and what they are and the wonderful things to come for your little boys as they grow into manhood. I've nearly lost a fortune. And tomorrow I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you the life and the things that my male life have built for me that I'm now going to get rid of to save a business that I built as a male and destroyed as a transsexual woman. My name's Shayna-Mae, and one of these days I'm going to tell you my real name. Let's grow this channel, folks. Get the message out there. God bless you all. Let's celebrate day 10. I'm back on an even keel. Let's see how this goes. Talk to you soon.